All right, so, when we talk about athletes who really changed the world, Muhammad Ali's name, well, it's got to be right up there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But what is it about Ali that makes him more than just a boxer?
Yeah.
I think that's what we really want to uncover in this deep dive. We're going beyond just, the knockouts to really understand the man behind the legend.
I think what's so fascinating is how much of Ollie's story you can really find within, like, the lines of his Wikipedia entry. You might think, okay, it's Wikipedia, it's just this list of dates and fights, but there are these, I don't know what you'd call them, these little hidden gems in there that reveal a lot about him.
Right.
About the man behind, kind of the myth.
Okay.
You know.
So we're digging into those gems today. Let's travel back to 1942. Louisville, Kentucky. Cassius Clay, as he was known then, is born into a segregated America. Can you imagine for a second being denied, like a drink of water? Simply because of your skin color. It happened to him.
Wow.
And, these formative experiences, I mean, they really shaped his worldview.
Absolutely. And those were, talk about defining moments for young Cassius Clay. I mean, the injustice that he witnessed and, including like the horrific murder of Emmett Till. I mean, that leaves a mark on you. It's indelible. And, to really understand Ollie, you have to understand the world that shaped him.
And it's so easy to assume that someone as outspoken as Ollie. It was always that way. But here's a surprising fact. He struggled with dyslexia. Think about that for a second. This is the champ, known for his way with words, right? Those rhymes. And that almost poetic movement in the ring.
Right.
Had trouble decoding letters on a page.
It's remarkable, isn't it? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, he found his voice. He became this master orator, captivating audiences with his wit. And it makes you wonder if overcoming that struggle almost like fueled his verbal dexterity, his ability to command attention with his words.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Okay, so let's unpack his early boxing career, Ben. We see these early fights, even as Cassius Clay, that they're laying the foundation for this persona. That would make him a global icon.
Yeah.
When you look at like his fighting style in those early days, what were your initial impressions?
Well, I mean, even in those early bouts, you could just see that there was a different kind of fighter emerging. I mean, he was fast, he was agile, and his footwork, I mean, exceptional.
Right.
But even beyond just the physical skill, there was a showmanship, almost like a strategic flamboyance that was so captivating.
Yeah, he was put on a show, wasn't he? It wasn't just about winning, it was about entertaining. He's predicting knockouts, the trash talking. I mean, some might even say that he borrowed some of that from professional wrestling, specifically gorgeous George Wagner. What are your thoughts on that comparison?
I mean, it's an interesting parallel because, Wagner was known for his flamboyant personality, that showmanship. And those are all things that Ollie clearly embraced. And, you could definitely say that he took inspiration from various sources, And I think that's part of what made him so compelling. He was crafting this larger-than-life persona that really transcended boxing.
And it worked. I mean, the guy was a marketing genius. He created this aura around his fights that you couldn't look away from even if you wanted to.
Right.
But it was his journey to becoming Muhammad Ali, his conversion to Islam, his refusal to be drafted during the Vietnam War. I mean, those were defining moments that would change everything.
Those decisions were both courageous and they were controversial, right? I mean, you think about it. Joining the Nation of Islam, which was a group that advocated for Black empowerment during a time of immense racial tension in this country. It was a bold statement. And then to refuse to be drafted, citing his religious beliefs and his opposition to the Vietnam War. I mean, that decision catapulted him to the forefront of the social change movement.
Yeah, and that's where we see this making of an icon, right? But it came at a price. His boxing license was revoked. He faced intense criticism, yet he stood firm in his beliefs. So let's dive into that pivotal moment in his life. When Cassius Clay becomes Muhammad Ali, and a champion becomes a voice for a generation.
Yeah.
But let's rewind a bit before we get to that, right? Before his stand against the Vietnam War, there were those legendary fights against Sonny Liston.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got this brash Cassius Clay challenging the undisputed heavyweight champion. This guy is Sonny Liston, who seemed invincible. I mean, what was the atmosphere like surrounding those bouts?
Right. Oh, man, just imagine the tension, I mean, Sonny Liston was a force of nature, known for his power, his intimidating presence. And here comes Clay, danced around the ring, predicting a knockout. No one had seen anything like it.
And he backs up those words in that first fight, outmaneuvering Liston. Who ultimately doesn't answer the bell for the 7th round? And that's when the world hears it, that line, "I shook up the world."
Yeah.
Did he live up to that declaration?
Absolutely. I mean, his victory over Liston, it signaled this real shift in boxing. It was
Yeah.
more than just a fight. It was a cultural moment with Clay, challenging the established order, both inside and outside of the ring.
Then comes the rematch,
Mm-hmm.
and that infamous phantom punch in the first round. I mean, to this day, people are still debating whether Liston took a dive.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that fight, and the controversy surrounding it?
It's one of boxing's greatest mysteries. Did Liston really get caught by that punch, or were there other forces at play? I mean, it's just fascinating how this single moment in time can spark such enduring debate.
Shortly after these fights, he embraces the name Muhammad Ali and aligns himself with the Nation of Islam.
Right.
And this is where, things get even more complex, I think, right? What can you tell us about the organization and the significance of Ali's conversion?
So the Nation of Islam in the 1960s, they advocated for Black empowerment, self-reliance. And it was a controversial stance, especially during the heart of the Civil Rights Movement. And Ali's it was this bold declaration of his identity, his connection to his heritage, and, his willingness to challenge that status quo.
Yeah, it's a side of Ali, I think, that often gets overshadowed by his boxing career. But it's crucial to understanding the depth of his convictions. This is a man who was willing to risk everything, his fame, his fortune, his freedom for his beliefs.
Yeah, and it wasn't just his conversion, right? It was his refusal to be drafted to fight in Vietnam. I mean, that really solidified his status as a symbol of resistance. I mean, his words, right, when he said, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me an NR." I mean, those words, they resonated so deeply, especially within the African-American community. And, they really became this rallying cry against the war and against racial injustice in this country.
Yeah, his words were powerful. And his actions, I think, were even more so. He was stripped of his title. He was banned from boxing. He even faced, potential jail time for his stance. Were there any other athletes who took a similar stand during this time?
Ali's actions were incredibly courageous, especially during that era. And, while he wasn't alone in his opposition to the war, few athletes, especially Black athletes, were willing to risk their careers and their freedom in such a public way.
And it's this period of exile from boxing. It's often overlooked, I think. But it's essential to understanding his character, because he could have easily backed down, apologized, and just continued his career.
Right.
But he chose to fight for what he believed in, even when it meant sacrificing everything.
Exactly. And that's what makes him such a compelling figure, right?
Yeah.
He used his platform to speak truth to power. He became a symbol of hope, a symbol of resistance for those who are fighting for equality, for peace.
Yeah, and there's this I think, lesser-known event during his exile, this Cleveland Summit, where he gathered with these other prominent Black athletes, right? You've got Jim Brown, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and they're showing support for Bill Russell, who was facing discrimination at the time. And it highlights, I think, Ali's commitment to collective action and standing up against injustice wherever he saw it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. Ali, he understood the power of unity, and he used his influence to amplify the voices of others who are fighting for change. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for a better future for his community.
Right.
And for all oppressed people.
Eventually, the legal battles are settled.
Yeah.
And he's allowed back into the ring.
Yeah.
And this sets the stage for some of the most legendary boxing matches in history. But his time away, it changed him. And it changed, I think, the way people saw him.
It did. He returned to the ring not just as a boxer, but as this cultural icon, this symbol of resistance, a voice for the voiceless. And the world was watching, eager to see what this transformed Ali would bring to the ring.
And what he brought was nothing short of spectacular. I mean, his fights against Joe Frazier, the Rumble in the Jungle with George Foreman. I mean, these weren't just sporting events. They were cultural phenomena. So let's dive into these legendary bouts and explore how Ali's boxing itself evolved during this period.
Yeah, it's amazing how those later fights, they really transcended boxing. They became these global events. Like, take the Rumble in the Jungle in 1974. You've got Ali, the seasoned fighter, right? Going up against this younger powerhouse George Foreman.
Right.
I mean, what was it like leading up to that match? I mean, the atmosphere was electric. I mean, Foreman was the heavy favorite, known for that brutal punching power. And a lot of people thought that Ali was past his prime, that Foreman would just overwhelm him.
And that's where Ali's, strategic brilliance comes into play, right?
Yeah.
The rope-a-dope, leaning back on those ropes,
Yeah.
letting Foreman tire himself out. I mean, it seems so risky at the time.
Incredibly risky. I mean, it was a calculated gamble on Ollie's part, relying on his stamina, his ability to withstand Foreman's power. Because he knew he couldn't outpunch Foreman,
Yeah.
so he had to outthink him, and he did. And it created, I think, one of the most iconic moments in boxing history.
Yeah, it's a testament to his mental toughness, too, right? His ability to stay focused under that kind of immense pressure. And then you got the Thrilla in Manila, his third and final fight against Joe Frazier. And that one is remembered for its sheer brutality.
Oh, absolutely. It was a grueling battle. Ollie himself said it was the closest thing to dying he'd ever experienced. I mean, both fighters just pushed themselves to the limit in that intense heat and humidity of the Philippines.
It's hard to imagine the physical and mental toll that those 14 rounds took on both of them. And I think what's so fascinating is that Ali's later career, it wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving something, I think.
Yeah.
To himself and to the world.
You're right. He was fighting against Father Time, fighting against the odds, and fighting against this perception that he was no longer the champion he once was.
Yeah. And throughout it all, he never lost that charisma, that way with words. I mean, it's no wonder that. He dabbled in acting. He even starred in a film about his life, right? Released spoken word albums.
Right. I mean, Ollie's influence, it went far beyond the boxing ring. He was a natural storyteller, a poet in his own right, and you can hear echoes of his rhythmic rhymes in the work of hip-hop artists today.
He was a pioneer in so many ways. And even after his boxing career ended, and he received his Parkinson's diagnosis, he continued to inspire. He became this global ambassador for peace, for humanitarian causes.
Yeah, his later years, they really revealed another dimension to his character. And, the fact that he faced his illness with the same courage and determination that he showed in the ring, I mean, that's truly remarkable.
It makes you realize that Muhammad Ali was more than just an athlete. He was a cultural icon. He was a symbol of resilience, a voice for the voiceless. And his story, it continues to resonate today, I think, reminding us to fight for what we believe in, to embrace our identities, and to never give up, no matter the odds.
He challenged us to be better, to think differently, to stand up for what's right, and his impact on sports, on culture, on society, it's undeniable.
He was one of a kind, that's for sure. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the extraordinary life of Muhammad Ali, it makes you wonder, how would we view him if he were just stepping into the ring today? It's a question worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.